They stood still, looking sad. That's what Liz read for us this morning from verse 17, chapter 24 of Luke. And depending on the translation that you look at, that looking sad part is either a statement by the narrator, as Liz read it correctly, or in other translations, it's actually the ending to Jesus' question. It's hard to tell in the Greek, but it may be that verse 17 actually says, "And he said to them, 'What are you discussing with each other while you walk along looking sad?'" It's when Cleopas snaps back at him and says, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place in these days?" Remember, they don't recognize Jesus at this point. They're too busy looking sad to see the risen Christ in their midst, and so they tell this stranger all about Jesus of Nazareth, that he was a great prophet, that he was mighty in deed and in word, that he was handed over to be crucified by their own religious leaders. And now it's the third day after that has happened, and some of the women told them that he had risen, they told him that the tomb was empty. And the disciples went and they looked inside, and they saw that the women were telling the truth, that the tomb was empty. And so here they are on the road to Emmaus looking sad. Which is when Jesus responds, it seems, with great frustration and says, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all the prophets have declared." Oh, how foolish you are. I'm a movie guy. I love movies. Thankfully, I grew up in a household where I was shown all of the good classic old movies. I like all kinds of movies. I like action and adventure and mystery and musicals and comedies. I love them all. I can quote most every line from a diverse array of movies, from Sound of Music to Star Wars to The American President to Three Amigos or Princess Bride. I love big action scenes and I love car chases, but really for me, the best part of a movie is that perfectly written and delivered dialogue or one-liner. I grew up watching John Wayne movies. He turned out to be not such a good guy, but he always had great one-liners. Katharine Hepburn could deliver a line like no other. Sidney Poitier was probably the best of his generation. Tom Hanks, of course, is amazing, but for me, the greatest of all time is Harrison Ford. Harrison Ford can deliver a line that makes relatively simple words written in a script immediately become iconic. And he's done it for decades, from Star Wars to Indiana Jones to Witness to Patriot Games, but maybe above all else, even above all of those classics that I just named, his most iconic line comes at the end of the movie Air Force One, where he yells, "Get off my plane." A well-written line of text, delivered in the right way, by the right actor, with the right emotion, can change everything. That's the best part of a movie for me. The problem, of course, with reading dialogue from a book, especially a book like the Bible, is that we are left to insert our own understanding, our own imagination into the text without a director to guide us or an actor to show us. We are left trying to guess what the inflection of each line might be, what emotion the character might be feeling. Take, for instance, verse 21 in our text for today. It says, "But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel." Now we know that these disciples were walking along looking sad, and so we've always read that text to be kind of quiet and sad, a statement of true loss. We had hoped, but now we are sad. That's how I've always read this text. But this year, when I read it again, it struck me differently. Whenever I've heard the words "had hoped" in my own life, the emotion that I hear is not one of sadness. Let me give you a hypothetical example, purely hypothetical. This could never possibly happen. Imagine for a second that my wife, Annie, has gone on a business trip. And she comes home after a long flight, and she is exhausted, and she is looking forward to a little bit of rest. And we walk into the house, and it is a mess. Again, this is hypothetical, could never happen. There are dishes in the sink and dishes on the table and clothes on the floor, and everything is out of place. Hypothetical, never could possibly happen. And imagine in that moment that I turn to Annie and I see her face and I ask, "What's wrong?" And she responds, "Well, I had hoped that you would clean up a little bit." Now I ask you, what emotion you might read into her words, "I had hoped"? Is it just a little bit of sadness? Jesus asks the disciples what they are discussing while they look so sad, and immediately Cleopas responds with a sarcastic kind of question. "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place here in these days?" And then he tells the stranger all about Jesus, and he says, "But we had hoped that he would be the one to redeem Israel." This year, for some reason, I heard that line, and I immediately felt the anger and the disappointment from this disciple who was headed home. The disciple who had left everything behind to follow Jesus, who would probably be chastised by his friends and his neighbors, probably not be welcomed very well at home, who might be in danger from the authorities, might be unwelcome now in the temple. He had hoped indeed. And now what? The story goes on, of course, that Jesus grants them incredible grace. He reveals the scriptures to them and ultimately reveals himself by breaking the bread, and their hope is renewed in verse 33. They rise up and they go back to Jerusalem and they tell the others. But here in verse 21, they are sad and they are angry and they are disappointed. And I think before we rush on to verse 33, we should sit there and consider that feeling. We had hoped. We get it. We had hoped too, right? We had hoped that we would not be fighting yet another war for oil in the Middle East. We had hoped by now that we would have evolved technologically and morally to be able to feed the world, to be able to give clean water to those who need it. We had hoped that with all of the lip service to morality over the last 50 years that blasphemy itself would be a red line for the Church of America. We had hoped that Dr. King's dream would have been reached by now. We had hoped that homelessness would be a thing of the past. We would hope that we would have learned some lessons from all of the corruption and all of the ugliness and all of the division that we have been through over 250 years. We had hoped for affordability for our children and a cure to cancer and the end of the drug epidemic, the peaceable kingdom. We had hoped that our loved ones wouldn't have gone before us. We had hoped, but instead we spend so much time filled up with anger and disappointment and yes, sadness too, that it fills us up and it takes us over and it brings us down and it keeps us blind to being able to see the risen Christ in our midst. Where did the hope go? After Cleopas goes on his little rant, Jesus responds in kind, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart you are to believe all that the prophets had declared." And here is the good news for them and for us, that is not where Jesus left them. That place of anger and disappointment and sadness and frustration, that place of blindness is not where Jesus left them. Instead, he first opened their minds to understand the prophets and the Gospels, and then he opened their eyes to recognize that he was right there with them the whole time. Yes, Jesus was frustrated by their lack of faith, their lack of hope, but still, Jesus chose and Jesus chooses to move them and us from that place of anger and frustration and sadness to a place of joy and of celebration and of hope. Now note that from that place of we had hoped to verse 33 where they rush off and tell the other disciples, note that from that place in the middle that nothing else changes for the disciples. None of their problems actually go away. They still have to deal with their neighbors. They still have to deal with the temple authorities. They even maybe have to deal with Rome. They have to live their lives here in the filth and muck of this world. But because Jesus opened their eyes, they now can repeat the words of verse 33. The Lord has risen indeed. It is the yet and the nevertheless of this life. Yes, things are bad, yet Christ is risen indeed. Yes, the world is ugly, nevertheless, Christ is risen indeed. Because he broke the bread, they no longer stood still looking sad. Instead, they went back into Jerusalem, back into that place that had just crucified Jesus. They started moving their feet and they started moving their lips, and they proclaimed the hope of the resurrection because they knew that Jesus was risen. They knew that he was still with them and that they were not alone. Our text for this morning moves miraculously from the words, we had hoped, to Christ is risen indeed. And all that happens there in the middle is that Jesus breaks the bread and their eyes are opened and they recognize that he never left them in the first place. Imagine what Harrison Ford could do with those lines. My friends, hope is not just a passive emotional state. Rather, it is an active, lively statement of faith that no matter what is happening in the world, Christ is alive. And if Christ is alive, then we move our feet and we move our lips and we proclaim the year of the Lord's favor here and now because it's still Easter. So come, ye faithful, raise the strain. Christ is alive, which means that every other power, every authority, every despot, every blasphemous fool, every ache and pain and struggle and disappointment in this life is by definition temporal. Because Christ is alive, we know that the story may be written, but that it isn't over yet. That we still have a part to play. With the inflection that comes from our lips and the action that comes with our feet and our hands. We had hoped so many things. And yet we open our eyes and see the beauty of this day and all of your faces and the children singing and the bells ringing. Christ is alive. Be not afraid. And that is the good news in this Easter season and forever and ever. Amen.